The Downers demanded that the bank give them their loan documents. They were shocked by what they found. Though the Downers' pay went straight into their Westpac account, their earnings were vastly inflated on some of the forms. A statement of income prepared by the bank put Michael's gross annual salary at $93,500. He'd actually earned less than $60,000. Kay's part-time wage of about $12,000 was more than doubled to $28,000.
You know, we've been loyal to the bank for 20-odd years. They knew what we were earning.
It's just full of all different handwritings. Proof that a lot of it's been filled in at the bank, by the bank, after we signed it.
Mm.
On a page of the loan application, Kay's signature appears to have been forged.
That my signature there is certainly dodgy. I mean, that goes backwards, mine goes forward.
It is fraud.
It's fraud, absolutely fraud.
And it's far from an isolated case. Criminologist and consumer activist Denise Brayley has been investigating bank fraud for 15 years. She's seen a vast number of cases like the Downers.
In all cases, and I've looked at well over 2,000, in each of these cases, they're unaffordable, unsustainable, and unverified.
Jeff Morris is the whistleblower who exposed Commonwealth Bank's financial planning scandal. He says a toxic incentive system at the banks encourages loan fraud.
You've got brokers and lenders who are being remunerated on the loans they write, simply massaging the figures to put it through the computer system, and then it spits out an approval.
The banks have just trashed their lending standards over a prolonged period of time, with significant evidence of banks massaging people's incomes in their loan application forms to make them look a lot more creditworthy than what they really are, which is essentially fraud.
Economist Lindsay David believes that loan fraud by banks is systemic. In an explosive submission to a Senate inquiry on white-collar crime, he and a colleague argued that banks have an interest in overstating the credit quality of borrowers. Why would the banks do this?
Yeah. The safer your mortgage book looks, the lower it costs you to do business. It's as simple as that. If you go and show that your borrowers are very creditworthy, you're going to get cheaper funding costs. And that's a win-win for the bank until the whole system breaks down, obviously. So as you can see here, the Australian debt to disposable household income ratios have increased significantly, and it looks like we're heading towards 200%, which is
phenomenal.
It's phenomenal.
On just about every measure, Australia's household debt levels are the highest in the world. Property prices have kept rising even though incomes are stagnant, with the lowest wages growth on record. Lindsay David says the only way that banks have been able to keep lending more and more is by compromising credit quality and doling out absurd amounts relative to income.
The American banking system never loaded up their citizens with so much debt like the Australian banks have done. I mean, you just got to look at the numbers. 124% debt to GDP ratio here in Australia. The Americans didn't even crack 100% at the peak of their housing bubble. That kind of tells you that, if the Americans were lending recklessly, how the heck are our banks lending responsibly?
If he's right, it could threaten the entire financial system. Just like in America, a lot of home loans have been bundled up and sold to investors who believe those loans are high quality. And the banks here have a solid reputation, but they're heavily reliant on funding from offshore to make new loans. So you wouldn't need a rise in the number of bad loans that was big enough to make the banks insolvent for us to have a crisis. All you'd need would be a rise that was enough to make those global funders lose confidence, and the funding would dry up and we'd have a meltdown.
I don't think Australians understand the risk our banks have taken in order to get house prices as high as they are.